Welcome, y'all, to um, Busting Out 2. It is put on by Fat Lib Inc., and their website is fatrose.org. As some of you know, it was going to be a part one on yesterday, but it was canceled, and hopefully it'll be rescheduled because Hunter and Deshaun just don't come with those games. And it was going to be amazing. And in the meantime, I know on Fat Rose's page is a way to share um, um, Deshaun's Cash App, PayPal, and Venmo. But that's definitely something to keep in mind. And remember to pre-order their book as well if you
Oh,
haven't.
what's the book called again?
Well,
Busting Out? No, that's not right. Is it called Busting Out?
no, but I know what it's about, and this is horrible. I know what it's about. It's about the connections of anti-blackness and anti-fatness.
Belly of the
And
Beast.
Belly of the Beast. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. This is called Busting Out. See, I'm all confused.
It's all good. So I'm going to say that information again at the end. You know, and to try and support them in this moment because, as we know, we're all we got.
Yeah.
You know, so it's important to support them. And I really hope it's something that can be rescheduled because it's a conversation that none of us want to miss. Because those two bring the heat on a regular day. So, yeah, so we all know each other, in case the audience doesn't know. Wendi and I are spouses and political comrades, and Kytara is family, and we're all here in New Orleans. So this is going to be a conversation, real informal, because like that's how we roll, but it's going to go deep. When y'all first, like, as I was preparing, I was thinking about first reading the title and what came up for me. Just like hearing carcerality. That's a heavy, heavy word. Punishment and anti-fatness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who wants to start?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, Wendy, you.
I just wanted to, I got that it's time to sing feeling.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to set our circle in song. And this is the song that came to me. I learned it from Che, who's just a wonderful person down here living in New Orleans. I have decided to walk with freedom. I have decided to walk with freedom. I have decided to walk with freedom. No turning back, no turning back. Though fear may find me, I walk with freedom. Though fear may find me, I walk with freedom. Though fear may find me, I'm choosing freedom. No turning back, no turning back, no turning back, no turning back. That just came to me.
Thank you, Wendi.
I feel like that would. What'd you say? Oh, I thought Wendy said something.
Oh.
That was like the
Kytara,
perfect way.
go ahead. It's so, I know we're all in this weird room.
Um,
Sometimes it helps me to close my eyes so that I can really feel y'all. So, Kytara, would you mind going ahead? Because you were going to talk earlier before I sang.
Yeah. Thank you. When I hear the word punishment, it automatically brings me back to like childhood, which I think for a lot of like fat adults who were fat children, that's kind of like the theme of like their childhood, you know, little like we're these like little people, and we're at our most vulnerable and we're dependent on adults to know what's best for us. And many of times like our adults, whatever, you know, trauma they are holding, think that like what's best for us and guiding us is punishment, um, especially around food. And so yeah, so much of like my punishment or discipline was like around food. So being put on diet, um, sneaking for to eat food because someone would make a comment about what I was eating or my body. Um, and so like I started to associate things as punishment. So if that meant like vegetables or like movement of my body, this all came as like punishment because it was like it felt like I was being targeted to like have these things done to me because I was a fat child. And so it wasn't necessarily like, oh, like you go outside to play with your friends and that's how you get your joyful movement. It's like, oh, come to the track with me. And like, no, 10 or 11-year-old wants to go to a track and walk around. But like so many things that I feel like were pleasurable, like were punishments for me, or like now that I find pleasurable or good, were started off as punishments for me. Because I was being punished because I was fat. So that's what I felt when I heard the word punishment, and then so much of like our in our adult selves are in like fighting it back around anti-fatness and fat phobia is kind of like trying to silence or get rid of the cop inside of me. this person that says like, oh, you don't deserve to be outside, like you don't have a summer body, you don't have a bikini body or beach body, and so you don't deserve to like exist in public because you don't have a body that is, as Wendi so wonderfully saying, able to like be free with in public. And so yeah, I brought up a lot of things that I've been working on around kind of abolishing this like inner cop in my head of like not punishing myself for gaining weight during the pandemic or eating things that I love, and being a fat adult.
Whew, all of that. I appreciated like how you started childhood because like that's what it brought me to as well, and just like the way that like um those experiences are so racialized and gendered. Like I remember like my parents like would say stuff like especially as far as my mom, like you're black, dark skinned, and you're a girl. You don't also need to be fat. It's going to be hard enough in this world. So it was this understanding like of fatness as its burden, of like blackness as its burden. It's like being a female assumed to be girl, like as its burden, and like loving me. And so wanting to have my road in this world be as easy as possible. And that's something that, I'm still unlearning, like not only all the ways that like anti-fatness, like anti-blackness are connected, but like that, like my fat, like internalized fat phobia is manifest in terms of what's easier on me, right? Like what's harder on me, and like this body is challenged, it's too challenging, it's too hard. And the way that like I learned punishment from that is, like at an early age, it was really clear that my fat, dark-skinned Black girl body was disorderly in some way. And so like the way to get it to be orderly is to punish it. So like all those messages about food, I totally learned that like, as well, in terms of, oh, well, I ate this, so I can't have that. So even though I want this thing, I learned to really like age train my body to withhold the things that I want because I must be punished. How else will this body, like this girl who I love and want to see safe, know that she has certain rules she has to follow in order, like, and I think like where I struggled is I sincerely, like, I believe that my parents feel like, and the people who raised me, like, feel like they were doing what needed to be done to make sure I could sing that song, Wendi. Like, I could walk in freedom, because burdens aren't things like that make you free. And like just thinking of like all those messages from enslavement that of course we have passed down, of course like all those messages of like the enslavers that were also passed down that we are still unlearning. But like that to me like is a connection, as far as like, how it's like simultaneously manifest systemically, and like how we enforce it and internalize it. I also think of it in terms of there are certain ways of being fat and there's certain ways of not. So like if your fat looks a certain way on your body, then that's acceptable, because it is consumable like in this way. Like, and how that also like leads to it. I have more to say, but I want us to have a conversation.
So much stimulation from what you're saying, like it's inspiring so many thoughts. But I followed Kytara's advice in preparing for this talk, and I wrote down a couple of ideas that I thought are kind of important to me to share. And I've never done that before, so I'm going to try it out here.
You got this.
Thank you. Because, so I was thinking about just the basics of what is carcerality, and so I was thinking that carcerality is punishment, it's violence to control behavior, it's policing to limit choices, it's shame and blame to control and have power over. It's kind of rooted in the superiority. It's rooted in white supremacist culture and values and capitalist culture and values and economy. It has to do with like population control and controlling the public space, you know, what is permitted in public. And I was thinking about anti-fatness as being kind of embodied punishment and shame and blame. I can't think of anti-fatness without thinking of shame and blame. And how much I've always experienced anti-fatness through kind of limiting like anti-fatness has often been kind of this kind of complicated experience because it usually has come through, or it's often come through, a concern for my well-being that gets that's kind of rooted in a lens that has to be outside of my own. And so that's my attempt to kind of share my baseline in terms of what these things mean to me. And I was thinking how I love to eat. I love to eat. I love food. I love good food. When people ask you, you know, like, what are your dietary needs? Mine are that the food be good, you know, and not nasty. And I love carnal pleasure, you know. I really love the sensation and the energy, the vibe of the food, you know, and good love. And I struggle with disgust and shame. And I was just thinking about how much I have not been able to kind of live into some of my core roles, liberatory roles in this life, because my relationship with food has had so many problems in it. And the problems, I don't know that they come from inside of me as much as they come from this kind of way of approaching food in relationship to carcerality. And the last thing I wanted to share is that I think a lot of my challenge with, not challenge with anti-fatness, challenge with the kind of ways that the body is policed in a carceral state have come from my commitment to self-love, you know, and the ways that the women around me have loved me throughout my life. You know, there's been a contradiction between the good love that I know and the way into self-love that I know, and my quest for wellness that I'm on, and the ways that my body is policed to be not fat. So I just want to read two things, and then I'll be quiet. I want to read this quote from Tony K. Bambara. It just struck me the first time I read it. You know, the Salt Eaters, when you open that book, chow, you know, I'm telling you, my friend Antonia Randolph gave me this book. What, babe?
Please continue. I need my water. Sorry.
Okay. When I was not doing well, and I had decided I needed to recuperate from anti-fatness and trying to build a life of well-being that was not directed by anti-fatness, you know? And so I was like, well, she was like, I think this book is for you. It's the book, The Salt Eaters by Toni K. Bambara. And the first line is, are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? Just so's you're sure, sweetheart, ready to be healed, because wholeness is no trifling matter. A lot of weight when you're well. And I was just so struck by how true that rings for me in my body, in my gut bone. Is no trifling matter, and how different, how I could feel when I would work to engage around wellness and well-being with support, you know, how that would often feel like it would be an experience with policing, not with being well. Does that make sense? And so
Fuck yeah, that makes sense.
And so I read a little longer. I mean, I had to put the book down, child. I had to put the book down. And I didn't, by the time I got back to it, it was maybe a year later, because I was just, I had to deal with what it laid on me. And I got to this passage, and I just haven't been able to get out of it. And I feel like it speaks to me, to anti-fatness and carcerality, because of who's telling it. This is in the voice of Doc Surge, who is a former pimp who's running the healing center in this Black community. And I was just so struck by how this person, who's human and not perfect, is actually more committed, like more dedicated to well-being than the state. You see what I'm saying? And he said, I am one beautiful and powerful son of a bitch. He told himself, smart as a whip, respected, prosperous, beloved, and valuable. I have the right to be healthy, happy, and rich, for I am the baddest player in this arena or any other. I love myself more than I love money. I love myself more than I love money and pretty women and fine clothes. I love myself more than I love neat gardens and healthy babies and a good gospel choir. I love myself as I love the spirit. I love myself in error and incorrectness, waking or sleeping, sneezing, tipsy, or fabulously brilliant. I love myself doing the books or sitting down to a good game of poker. I love myself making love expertly or tenderly and shyly or clumsily and inept. I love myself as I love the spirit's mind. He continued his litany, having long ago stumbled upon the prime principle as a player, that self-love produces the gods, and the gods are genius. It took genius to run the Southwest Community Infirmary. So he made his rounds of his hospital the way he used to make the rounds of his houses to keep the top spinning, reciting declarations of self-love. That seems like balm and medicine to carcerality and anti-fatness to me.
Wow. That's such that's such a perfect addition to add to this conversation. So thank you for citing that. And I can see why you had to like come back to this, or this is something you couldn't get over, because that's real powerful.
Well, Kytara, that recitation was doing my assignment that you gave me.
That is I'm glad you took my my advice. um, but I want to get back to something you mentioned about like carnal pleasure and how, and then kind of go back to like childhood around like eating and dressing myself. Like when you're like growing up, it's like one of the first things you were like able to do on your own. Um, and having that so heavily policed by particularly family, but also strangers, because strangers really strangers really are friendly when they see a fat person, and and they become doctors. Uh, so I feel like that, like early policing on like what I could eat and like what I dress like. I was also always told to like wear dark colors. Um, my mom would be surprised when I had like tank tops on. She's like, "Oh, those big pretty arms are out." Like she was just shocked that like I would have my arms out. Um, and then that's like evolved into my adult life and like seeking pleasure. Because now I'm like, when I grew up and started like being sexually active, like I didn't have examples of like to be self-determined during sex,
Yeah.
or like, or I didn't understand like what pleasure was, because so much of it was just controlled from a young age. So I was relying on other people to like give me pleasure or define pleasure for me, and what felt good, and whether it be like having sex a certain way or doing certain things during sex. I didn't have that autonomy and the like the words and the language and confidence, really. But I feel like that confidence was like kind of just bullied out of me, to have like the sex I want or like eat the, and so like now like everything's intrinsically tied to those messages that I received as a little girl, that because I did not have this certain body, I was not deserving of pleasure, because obviously I must have been overeating and over consuming to have this body, and so I need to stop. I don't deserve all that. I can't do all that.
Right.
And also like my body either being like, and the way like I was, I guess, soothed as a like growing up and like getting to a young adult was like, oh, well, some men like big women, so that'll be my like saving grace. That like there's some men out there who have a fetish or who likes your body, and that'll make it okay that you're this size. Other than that, no. And so, but the message was never, as that wonderful excerpt you read, Wendi, about my self-love, about like what I like and was I enjoying my body, not somebody else. So yeah, that's like another point of like carcerality. Because we see a lot of folks who are involved in the carceral system, whether it be like mental health, like institutionalized, or prisons, or halfway houses, or house arrest. We see that as punishment, and so those people don't deserve pleasure. And so it's like, it's wild. People are like, oh, well, you're funny, like you don't deserve like having like cool air and not overheating. You don't deserve to have comfort in these places. And you're like hidden away from society. And so this also brings up, my family used to send me, or threatened to send me, to see my aunt in California for the summer, because she was like very thin and very health nut. So instead of like, oh, I'm going to California to be at the beach, it's also a threat. It's a punishment. It's like, oh, we're sending you away to lose weight. And And so again, it's like we're hiding away people we see as problems.
Mm, mm, that's
That part, like, I'm thinking back like to when I first um read the title. I was like, carcerality, punishment, anti-fatness, and I thought about it, and I thought of like these three D words. I thought of politics of disposability.
yeah.
I thought of the politics of deservability and the politics of desirability, and how
Mm,
they are connected, like in terms of something that I think Wendi and Kytara said is like how pleasure and freedom and the antithesis of that being incarceration and carcerality. You know what I mean? Because like ultimately, like what being in cages or like in a system that punishes you does is it takes away your freedom as far as how you want to do things. You know, like as far as like what choices look like, which is another conversation like that I want to talk about as well. But like ultimately, like I was thinking about, we get these narratives over and over again of who is deserving and who is not, who is worth us saving, who is worth us supporting, and ultimately like those messages of like who is disposable, who is deserving of our time, they fuel who we see as desirable, and
mm,
it like
mm,
it's perpetuated again and again, and inherently and like it's inherently a white supremacist endeavor, you know, because that like is the basis of white supremacy and its sibling heteropatriarchy and their sibling capitalism is like it's literally built on the foundation that some people must win, and if you have a winner, you literally can't have a winner if you don't have losers.
mm.
And to me, like how that plays like things like anti-fatness in particular, it like isn't only about like punishment. Like we don't deserve like really like to be alive. And like I feel like COVID, like, you know, this moment has really like brought that home, like for many people, especially with like hospitals and ventilators. But of course, like, it's been around for a while, like that sentiment. But I really think about like anti-fatness, um, which is connected, of course, to anti-blackness, like in terms of like this focus on like individual choice and personal responsibility, right? Because like it's connected, like she isn't worth, they aren't worth our time, our resources aren't worth being alive because ultimately she brought this shit on herself, right? Like it's something that she did that is why she's in the condition. So like either it becomes like hyper medicalized, right? Or like all these ways like of ensuring but like how Wendi said, like shame and blame, like you did this, you know, also in terms of how like back to parents, we all have Black parents, and Black parents, especially Black mamas, had the memo very early. They are responsible for the bad choices of their children. So I think about how that also influenced how our mamas in particular, but our parents and the other grown people who helped raise us internalize that in terms of how they parented us as fat Black girl children. White people, whiteness gets to have like, what's that expression, like the lone wolf? You know, like when they kill everybody, we don't get that.
What?
You know what I mean? I'm talking about, you know, like when like you have like the school, like the white school shooter that's like, oh, like it was an individual act, and it's never um indicative of the culture of whiteness. That's never true for us.
Yeah, you gotta represent well for the race.
And everyone gets the memo that, like, we can't represent well for the race because we like, us being alive demonstrates the very bad traits that a respectable Negro isn't supposed to uphold, right? Clearly, we don't have self-control slovenly, like all of these stereotypes that we then are contending with. And so, like, that's one of the things that, and therefore, like, it goes back to deserving. We deserve to be criminalized and policed. That is the consequence of existing as fat and daring to be free. So, like, that's just what I was thinking of. Then, like, as far as choice, like the focus on individual choice, like, that's problematic, especially because I feel like it reinforces neoliberalism. Like, to me, it's problematic, like, to make it about individual choice, and choices aren't actual things that people have in this economy. But we're punished as if choices actually exist in this economy, like in neoliberalism. And it's like everybody has access to the same choices, I think, is a better way of saying it.
Or that the way I'm thinking of it when you're talking is like, I get compelled to make choices from a limited buffet when the choices are actually unlimited. They're only limited by my imagination and my capacity to see them. That's what it means to be free. But I get compelled to only see the choices that the economy, the media, the culture, the politics choose for me.
Exactly.
So that I can be complicit with whatever the dominant culture or the dominant forces in the economy, the dominant forces in the politics desire. And unfortunately, that's often not what's actually in the best interest of me and my people. And I think that's such a big deal, is to be able to see. I think that's one of the reasons why I sometimes experience resistance and kind of haterade from people, is because I have made choices, and I see choices that I have and that I take. Like, I make choices that are not, but now there are consequences for the choices I make. And I do have middle class access, so that's not to be taken lightly. That nothing erases that. And there are people that I share class status with who don't make the same choices I make. There are people who, and like, I feel like a lot of times people, I just make this up. So this is just me making it up. I see some people who I could just see on their face, they mad that I'm happy. Like, how did you get such an extraordinary good love? how do you have the nerve to show off good love? How do you, you know, have the nerve to be connected to your family in your queerness? And I'm just saying, I know a lot of times it's because I'm so big and fat. But I just don't pay attention sometimes to the, like when you get compelled to make certain choices, I'd rather take the licks than to not be free. I'd rather take the licks. This is sweeter than the other options, you know? And I think that's got a lot to do with carcerality too. Like living, it's the result of colonization that demands like the separation of mind, body, and spirit. And carcerality is about, I don't know that we would have carcerality without colonization, because colonization is about limiting these choices, and about like using violence to enforce being complicit with separating mind, body, and spirit, when it's so counter to like what makes us human, and counter to what you need to grow and all of that, and live. And so I feel like when I'm like, there's a way. Oh, you know what? I saw these hearts coming up on the screen and it totally distracted me from what I was saying. What was I talking about?
You were talking about separation from your spirit and your body with colonization.
I remember. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not used to this. And so what I was thinking was a big part of what gets me to be complicit with this strange thing called punishment and carcerality and colonization, white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and I see homophobia, transphobia, misogyny as heterosexism as weapons of patriarchy. Like, I don't understand. Like, what gets me complicit with it is violence. You know what I'm saying? And part of the magic of it, that's not good magic. It's the mystery of it that's not good, is how it can get me. It works on the inside, where it starts informing my imagination before I even realize that I'm making choices. It starts telling me, like, I start believing things that are not true, like that I am not inherently valuable, that I have to be a certain size in order to be valuable, that I have to be, that I have to hide my problems in order to be valuable, that I have to pretend I'm someone I'm not in order to be valuable. That's connected to this idea of colonization, and this idea that Black women, Indigenous women are not inherently valuable, but only valuable to the end of our usefulness to capitalism. That's what I was thinking. It got a little away from me.
Nah, you tied it all together. You tied it all together. That was perfect. I was going back to what you said about you have to be thinner or just like this limitation of your imagination. And now I'm thinking about when I was like a teenager and in middle school, all like when I imagined myself as like a grown up and like successful grown up, I was thin. I was also lighter. And and unexplicably, like like I was like, I don't know how I was getting like all these shades lighter. Like in my mind, I was a lighter person with a different type of hair texture, and I was thin. And that was in my mind how a successful adult Kytara would look like. The person who would like become a doctor and like be married and have this like penthouse in Manhattan or whatever. Like I couldn't look like this and be successful, and I couldn't be happy looking like this.
But you're still successful.
Yeah. Like no one tells you as a fat kid that like you're gonna be a happy fat adult. Like there weren't people, I didn't have those examples. Like you see examples of like fat Black women, like they're the sidekick or the comic relief. They aren't the like the love interest. They aren't the boss, whatever. And if they are, it's a parody. It's like, oh, that's funny that like this fat Black woman is desirable. That's interesting. That's not normal. And so yeah, like my imagination was so stunted that like I couldn't see myself as I am now being happy as an adult, because I was told like I wouldn't be happy, and that all these identities I hold would be burdensome, like you said, Mandisa, and make life harder. And like, of course, like our Black mothers don't want that for us, especially as like a child of a woman who grew up fat as well and was a fat adult. And so I think a lot of her internalized like fat phobia was projected on me, and it was all like, I just want better for you.
Right.
So like when her first husband like cheated on her or would be physically violent with her, she considered that with being a bigger woman. And so she connected those like these things that about me, your fat Black daughter is gonna have a hard time. And she even said it straight to me one day. It was like, have you thought about losing weight? Because it would expand your dating pool, and I just want you to be happy.
Oh.
And so like, and it came from like a genuine place of concern.
I know it
like,
did.
And that's the complicated and hard part.
Yeah.
Is that she didn't think anything was wrong with what she said. She thought this was advice. She thought she was doing the best she could as a mother to like warn me of this like this bleak future that she thought I would have if I stayed this weight.
Right. She was expressing her love for you.
Yes. And like, I think of that as like rooted in enslavement and white supremacy and capitalism. Like in terms of like, where do we get these narratives of like punishment as love? Like I was definitely a kid who definitely heard, in her household, I'm beating you, or I'm punishing you, that way the cops don't have to. And I know that I'm not the only, child who heard that, in terms of like, it was communicated early that like, that's how love is expressed. And that love is what keeps you the fuck alive. Because as like, I come from people who never left the Deep South. And it's a lot of thoughts about that, like about who's stronger and who's valuable and who's deserving. And all that shit is bullshit. If you are Black in this made up ass nation, you have a narrative. And they are different narratives, like based on, how you transgress, like how you moved, but it's not about like north south shit. And I think like that there is a particular narrative like that comes out of people who are descendant of people who didn't move far off the land that their people were enslaved on. And that's the narrative like I'm speaking to, of like, like I think about sometimes my mom, like people on her side often live really long times, and really it was only her generation, post Second World War, where if you made it past 5 years old, everyone else lived to be 100. But her, like, or late 90s is early on her side to like transition. But her generation was the first who,
Shucks, Uncle Tack, every time I see him, he looks
okay,
young.
look younger.
And I
But
swear he live on a diet of fried chicken and whiskey.
yeah, 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 that's what he eats. But just thinking of like her generation, 30s, 40s, 50s, you know what I mean, 60s, from like 60s, 70s. So like, and I think about her great aunt, who's one of the people who raised her, was enslaved. So I think about how I was raised by a woman who was raised by a formerly enslaved person. And like, what are the narratives of love, of survival that have been passed down? And like, what are the things that I have to decide every day to fucking end? Not because I don't value it, but because it's not actually growing the freedom that I know we all deserve. And that punishment, that way like of protecting, is some of the shit that I know many others are desperately trying to unlearn each day. Like it was, like I'm also thinking of that in terms, paternalism, which is something else how I see it, like particularly like the carcerality, like the focus on the state, and like incarceration as like the way to solve. I think of that in terms of carceral feminisms, which I don't even validate. It's a pseudo feminism. Like this. I like ultimately it is rooted in.
Wait, babe, what is that? Carceral feminism? That's a oxymoron.
Exactly, but it's a helpful term, I think, because it names people who are ultimately invested in the state as a means of protection for some.
Oh, okay. So like calling the police on an abuser.
Mm-hmm. Partnering with the DA like around violence intervention programs that have never actually saved
sometimes
them.
you have to call. I'm sorry. I am an abolitionist, but I have not solved yet some of these everyday we past negotiating problems.
Is that what it means to be abolition? Like that you have to have solved them?
Well, I'm saying that I'm an abolitionist who understands that that I'm gonna I called the ambulance when my dad wasn't needed a way to get from the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
And I would call the police if I was in a situation that I didn't know how to handle,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody was bleeding out. I'm just saying, to me, we have yet to solve to that scale.
I don't think that's what makes somebody an abolitionist or not. I think that's like false equivalency. And I think it's often a way like that people like try to like shut down abolitionists to be like, well, if you do this, then you can't possibly be. So that's why I was asking that question, because to me, well, first of all, like abolition is like a political framework it's also like an organizing strategy, and it's also a daily praxis that isn't actually only about the prison industrial complex or like abolishing prisons. That's a major part of it, but it's also about abolishing the conditions that say cages is how we deal with our problems. And that to me is like the much harder work, you know, of like, what is like, is the abolition like of a society that says we must have prisons, you know, as this thing that people who aren't desirable and who are disposable go. And something like that I have been thinking about is, and to me it's rooted in like a paternalism, which is rooted in um like a superiority, you know, like we know what's best for you. Like, I appreciate you like for saying about imagination and how our imaginations are colonized. Because it's hard, not impossible. It's hard to dream of a world that doesn't punish as means of dealing with the shit that happens. But something else that I've noticed is sometimes like I've been in abolitionist spaces, and we're talking about this world that, you know, like what happens after abolition or like all the moments of abolition. And sometimes it's this assumption like that in this world, in this free world, like fatness doesn't exist, or like sex workers don't exist, or like abortion isn't a thing, or like um, disabled people don't exist. And that to me is so telling. And to me, like it kind of like points out that like not all the forms of anti-fatness that we experience is like blatantly like the, you know, you're fat, you're undesirable, and fuck you and all of that. Like that's a part of it. And it's also the like benevolent forms, you know, of like, well, yes, fatness is okay now, but once we get in this world in which these things are actualized, really, it's not going to be these type of things. And that to me uh, uh, is another layer of the conversation that we're up against in terms of like, okay, like so we can talk about how like environment and oppression and all of that. And it doesn't matter what the fuck is going on, it's okay to be fat. And somehow, like, I see that still get lost, even in spaces in which we say we have a shared language that is a little bit harder to unpack because, again, like, we have the shared language sometimes, you know. And the reason why, like, I was making an analogy, like, to sex workers or abortion is because I see that with those issues as well, where it's like, okay, well, sex work, you know, sex industry in this situation, but ultimately, you know, folks wouldn't need to engage in it. How the fuck are you gonna say that? That's making assumptions about why people engage in sex work, and it's complex. Same thing with abortion access. So like that's also the shit like that I see, even in people who say, you know, you know, I'm against fat phobia, or like I'm against these things. It still like plays out in these like, okay, but ultimately you still think that we shouldn't exist. So you're really not that different than the people who blatantly say like y'all are horrible or whatever, like the blatant stuff is.
Can we talk a little bit about like the difference between violence, harm, and discomfort?
How about if you start?
Something about when you were talking, I was like, I feel like I just feel like there's a difference between these things. I think that a carceral state does insist on using violence to impose the dictates of an oppressive economy, culture, politic. You know what I'm saying? Like there are, like, if I could choose not to pay the bank for our mortgage, and I would then be violently removed from our home, you know, and all of our belongings would be put out on the street. Like, I could choose not to, I could choose to, if I'm stopped by the police and I choose to stay within my rights and they ask me to get out of my car, and I could choose to say no, you know, and I would be within my rights, but I might have to then deal with the consequences of having made that choice. Like, I'm just saying, they're choices, but violence is being used to enforce those choices. And because some violence is I wouldn't say it's conceptual, it's like not material, it's immaterial. Some of the violence, like getting, like, there are aspects of getting kicked out of my house that are immaterial. The house is material, but the impact that, like, being told that I ain't shit, the way you get experience not being shit when your housing is insecure, is immaterial. You know what I'm saying? But that's still harmful. But then there's the harm. There are ways that we harm each other that are uncomfortable. There's like, it's not harm. I want to talk about the difference between harm and discomfort. Like, there's hearing you say to me, Mandisa, actually, Wendi, I think you need to expand your understanding, you know? And this is a moment where you need to grow. And me being like somebody who thinks of myself as somebody who's willing to grow, I feel uncomfortable when you call my attention to ways that I need to grow. That discomfort is not the same thing as immaterial harm. And I feel like the carceral state has us all fucked up about that. Like, confused about the difference between violence, harm, discomfort, you know?
Well, yeah.
And I'm pointing that out because we're here and we're talking about it. And we're saying punishment and control and limited choices and shame and blame. And so much of that happens inside, you know? And being able to understand the difference between what is the violence from the state, what is our internalized, you know, oppressive shits, and what it is, the discomfort that comes with living and growing, you know, and needing to change and adapt and let go and be different. Those can all not feel good, but they're not all the same. And so I just want to say that I don't collapse all of those things as the same. And I think that's important because there's some things that I feel I'm a very powerful person. You know, I think everybody has power. Every being has power. Ants have power. The air has power. Every being has power. But the power that we need to organize is like we have to organize collectively to build political power, to build economic power, to build to leverage our cultural power, to be able to make change in our material lives, to end the prison industrial complex. That's what's required, is to organize, to collectivize the power that we have. But that's not the same thing as not as individually having power. Nothing. We are all individually powerful. You know, it's just some of these things, but no amount of the power that I individually has is going to dream away prison industrial complex. And no amount of, me being a very powerful individual doesn't dream away the lie that fat women aren't beautiful, when every woman I grew up with, all the women in my life as a kid, I'm thinking of T. Bev, I'm thinking of Aunt Jeannie, I'm thinking of Mama Aretha. They were all fat women. And they were, some of them were real fat and some of them were a little bit fat. And they were so fly. They were so the people I wanted to be when I grew up. And I loved the way that the people in their lives loved them. They all had partners who adored them, and it was so discordant the way that I would hear people talk about fat women as ugly and unattractive. And I think that's one of those, I know I'm kind of all over the place here, but that's discordant to me. That's part of how I knew anti-fatness was a thing, because it sounded so much like anti-Black, because it felt so much like racism, and it felt so unnecessary as white supremacy. And I'm just trying to point out the difference between the violence, the harm, and the discomfort. Like the discomfort of me saying, I love my fat body. I love my body the way I am, including when I feel the ways I feel ashamed. That is, there might be discomfort around that, but that's not me causing others harm, and that's not equal to the violence from the state and the kind of policing that comes with policing your body. So I'm just trying to draw the threads between all of these things, because when we talk about carcerality, we're talking about institutional power. We're talking about institutional power in a system that's powerful. The prison system, the unjust criminal, the criminal justice system, the criminal injustice system, the system of policing, the institution of policing, the system of prisons. And that's not, like these are institutions and systems that are violent. That's not the same thing as what we do to each other as individuals and interpersonally. And I feel like I hear that mixed up a lot when I hear people talking about it.
It's connected though, because it's connected. And I feel like that's the part that that I know like that's the part that's important to name, is that like we're not experiencing institutional anti-fatness on Monday and then like at like 9 p.m. and then like on Tuesday at 12 p.m. Okay, now it's time for the interpersonal. You know, like the same way that like we, like as Black feminists, inherently know that like we aren't just race and gender and all these things, but like race is gendered, gender is raced, all of these things. That is also what's true um, of the ways like institutional violence and interpersonal violence and like internalized operate um, in our lives. And I think like that's what makes it so hard, like to be able to like parse out exactly what I'm hearing you say. You know, like me saying to you, like, I think this is an area of growth. And FYI, we have that conversation often with each other because like we're spouses and we're also like political comrades. It's not just kissing, you know. Um,
Although I do really like your kisses.
Thank you, babe. I enjoy yours too.
Yeah.
It was inevitable to happen if you know, having a couple on a panel, you know. Um,
This is the
but
good stuff.
um, but like, I think that's the hard shit, is being able to like hold that all of these are like simultaneously happening in our lives and impacting us, and that there are some key differences. But also, like, we can't act like one isn't influencing the other. You know, like there are like, and I'm thinking back, you know, how I go back to enslavement and like the messages that we got that like stem from like the control of Black reproduction, you know, and like these myths around um Black women as unrapeable, right? And how that then moves forward into the 2021, right? Like, and so like, yes, like that's ultimately like an institutional violence, but then it gets manifest because a lot of people fucking know ain't shit gonna happen to me if I do this shit.
Oh,
That's
babe.
the interpersonal part as to why
Girl.
I think it's important to just like name that, like,
That's right.
yes, they're different. And
That's right.
that's the hard shit, right? We're like,
Yeah.
we experience spaces where we hold each other responsible for the institutional shit. So I'm not
Yes.
saying it's like easy to like parse out, but
That's right.
ultimately, like those things are all influencing each other.
You're right.
So like, I just wanted to explicitly say that in what you were saying, because I just want to like uplift that like we are experiencing things simultaneously. And again, like thinking of like, you know, like coming out of the anti-violence world, that's how I got into movement. And this is like, I think also where it gets challenging. It's not up to the person experiencing like that moment of like active violence to like figure it out and like be all, you know, oh, well, yes, I know this is institute. No, like, how do we have people around us who can do that? Like, so like in that moment of like something, we can go to the next breath and, you know, and those sort of things.
Whew. Whew. Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about how much you're talking about, Kytara, your experience with anti-fatness, which I think is just another expression of kind of the braid that is white supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal, imperialist colonization. You know, like you've named so much of your recognition of that, of like how your life has been shaped by that braid in your childhood. So you're thinking about how do you, you know, children are amazing because here you are, an extraordinary, like an awesome being, you know. But like, how do you do those? How do you navigate that, you know, as a child? Like I think about all of that. Like when I think back to my childhood and all of the yummy food and the ways that people would, like my grandmother would insist on giving us, she taught me how to pick out a watermelon, and she would tell the best stories about how they raised melons in her childhood, and how they would be so decadent as to slice the melons and only eat the heart and feed the rest of the hogs. And how she was raised in the Depression. So for her to give us food was the best, and she would make me my egg sandwiches exactly the way I wanted them, and get me my salami for my lunch meat sandwich for lunch, and insist on, if you eat as much as you want, and if we need more, we'll go to the store. And for me, that's the way I experience her, like unwilling to be bound by the way capitalism had hurt her life, and knowing all my family traditions, I know so much about my history because of the food that my people give me, and the ways that people, I feel like, have tried. Like I have felt when people tell me what I should be eating is food that's not combined, but clean food. Is food. How you gonna have jambalaya if you eating clean? And I just noticed how much of all the foods that I grew up being given to as expressions of, you are important, you are valuable, you are cared for in this place, all the smells that come with that, and the memories that come with that none of that is included in clean eating. And I was like, now how you going, that don't make no kind of sense. That people, and whenever you hear people talk about Black people's food or poor people's food, it's always, like whenever people making Black food, they elevating it. How you gonna elevate soul food?
Right.
How you gonna elevate?
Right. It don't need to be improved.
You can't improve it.
If you eating soul food and say it needs to be improved, that's because you ain't seasoned the shit.
Or you just made it badly.
Yeah.
Right. That's what you said. Babe, I mean, who would ever say, I'm elevating Parisian cooking, I'm elevating French cooking? They wouldn't say that. No, you're not elevating it. You anglicizing it. And now if you're insisting that anglicizing a thing is making it more healthful, well, I got questions. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going off on a tangent.
No, that was great. I feel like people of color in general, but like my experience as a Black woman, like food, and it's so you get so many mixed messages, because like one hand you're like, oh, you're fat, you need to like lose weight, and then the other hand, like people are giving you food to like show love, and I'm like, okay, Y'all confusing me because I used to like be under my grandma who would make cake, and she would always like leave enough batter for me to have like a little tiny cake on my own.
Ooh.
And that was like the best part. Like, and she's like a bigger woman. Like the women I like who like have loved me have all been like bigger. Um and just like feeding each other is just like how we show love. So like when like other kids like, why are you so fat? Whatever. I was like, because I'm spoiled. Like my family feeds. Like, that was what I was told to like tell people when they would try to like bully me about my weight. It was like, tell them that you spoiled. Because people are loving and giving you like the food that tastes good.
Mm. Yes, indeed. I know that experience. And I grew up, people would make all kinds of assumptions about the food I grew up eating. Because I grew up with a mother who left home at 14, and all of her food memories, as far as I could tell, lead to I don't want it. You know what I'm saying? So everything I grew up with her cooking was something she learned from a magazine or a restaurant, because she wasn't trying to relive her growing up memories. And I grew up eating, spirulina and, oh Lord, I grew up eating in ways that were very much more Anglo than the people I grew up around. And we were there off and on. We were vegetarian, and so people make all kinds of assumptions. I'm a 500-pound woman, and so people make assumptions about the way I grew up eating. You know what I'm saying? Now I go to my grandmother's house, and that was another story. Or I go to my Grammy's house. I had family here in New Orleans. My parents weren't from here, so my grandparents were in Southern Illinois and New York, respectively. And we'd get sent off to them summers and holidays sometimes. But my everyday grandparents, I had my dear here in town, I had Grammy, and I had my mom. And they all cooked. And T-Bev, I was at T-Bev's house most days, and she cooked. And I'm talking about cooked. I mean, creamed corn and sausage over rice, and red beans and rice and salt meat. And, oh, my mouth is watering just thinking about it. And spaghetti and meat sauce. And all things that I didn't necessarily get at my mama's table, And my father was always ruining everything. I could count on him for a grape soda and some Cheetos and a po' boy. But not at my mom's house. My mom was very, she wanted to think of food as medicine and thought that meant a very narrow set of things. But the food was always made with love. And pleasure was always an important part of it.
And you know what I bet, Wendi? That
What?
if people make comments to your parents like about your weight or something like that, I bet you it was made to your mom and not your dad in the same way.
It's so true.
You know what I mean? In terms of like
grape soda slinger himself.
Right.
He didn't get that. And in fact, I know this because my mom talked about it. Like, she'd be like, people would tell me all the time, and I was so torn. But I thank my mom, because my mom would, what my mom would say, Wendi, you healthy. That's what my mom would say. When do you healthy? And we've definitely had a lot of food struggles through the years. Don't get me wrong. But I think early on, I actually think she was a little happy to see me be chubby because she was so skinny. She had been given such a hard time for being skinny that she was like, my baby plump, you know? So I think my mom was really proud of my chubbiness. And for my mom, it meant that I was well fed and well cared for and that my health was protected, you know? And I'm so grateful for those ways that for those moments in my life where I was able to escape from the tyranny of anti-fatness, and where I had these kind of reprieves from being policed in a way that was suffocating. And instead, it was just so liberating, I mean, the number of fat women in my life. I mean, I was just like, who are these people who ain't thick? I don't know. Like the number of time people were like, oh yeah, we like a big hipped woman. I knew that. And I was like, well, thank God I'm big hipped.
I just want to do a time check. I think we're like 3 minutes to 8:30 our time.
I was thinking, I was going to say something similar. I wonder if we can, not so much in the conversation, but pause it and encourage, like the people who are listening and the people who know, and of that, the people like who know us, of course, to find ways of continuing this time. Well, first of all, I want the three of us to finish this, to continue this conversation, and also just like for us, in the audience, to have this conversation and more. Again, I do want to mention that this is a part 2. The part 1 was supposed to happen on yesterday. So if you could make sure to check out Sean's Cash App, PayPal, and or Venmo, which is in the Fat Lib Inc. Post. And also, if you have not already, pre-order Belly of the Beast, because it is that book. And also, if you could check out fatroad.org, which is just a really dope-ass website organization of folks who are committed to not only talking about anti-fatness, but also organizing towards fat liberation. But are there any closing thoughts or things to say? This has been mind-blowing on so many levels, and I love how we started and ended with childhood. I think that just says so much.
Yeah. Closing thoughts, pointing out what you said, this is part 2. There are other 2 parts in the future this week, respectively Wednesday and Thursday, around kind of the similar topic of abolition and fat liberation. And it's always wonderful sharing space and talking with you two. I feel like I told you this I said this to somebody else, but it's all positive. Before I moved here, I had basically researched, and so I knew of y'all. And I was so I made it a point to seek you out and get to know you, because I was I need to know these people. And I think I told someone that like I love y'all as like a couple, and this like what I could probably never had imagined, like this fat black queer love, and it's just very inspirational. And so
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
always grateful to like be in y'all space and conversation with y'all.
You're an
Oh,
inspiration. You know, we love you. And the inspiration that I see you as somebody who's living her best fucking life.
best life.
You are free and you fucking act like a Kytara. And
Yes.
it's a pleasure to know you.
I
You want me
remember
to talk with
meeting.
you?
I'm sorry, babe. Go ahead.
No, exactly. I remember that it was on our street. Well, at the
Yeah,
time, our street. Yeah, like that
Oh
like
yeah,
Halloween party.
yes.
I remember, and I was like, babe, we're gonna have a new friend.
Yes, we were excited.
I know. I was so excited when we gave you a ride, and I was like, yes, let's give her a ride so we can extend our time.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, I remember that. So
Yep.
it's so amazing. It's really nice to be enjoyed by people we enjoy, you know? And that's a hilarious story. That's funny. And I want to say thank you for inspiring this conversation, for teaching so well about the ways that you see the relationship between carcerality and anti-fatness, for not just teaching with your words, but being in practice. You know, I see
Mhm.
you on the streets. I see you out here in these streets
Okay.
practicing. You know what I'm saying? Practicing.
Yeah, it's
Just
not a
I
hot
just
girl summer for
appreciate
you. It's a hot girl every day.
it's a hot girl every day.
We
And I
see
just want
you.
to thank you. Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you and the Lord. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Grandmama. Thank you, Aunties. Thank you.
Everybody.
And I want to say thank you, Mandisa. Mm, thank you. Thank you for always teaching me, how to grow deeper and wider. I really appreciate it. I wouldn't have been able to do this without you. Thank you for teaching me that I'm sexy and that I'm lovable, in my whale-sized self. That
I'm not the
I've
only
been
one
able
who's
to.
taught you that, but yes, you're very welcome. Oh, the numbers keep diminishing as we continue.
Everyone's like, okay,
Is it
well,
too much, y'all? Sorry. They're
It is time. It
like,
is time.
and we're
Yeah,
here to
it's a
talk
lot.
about carcerality. I'm just
Okay.
joking. I know it's been a while, but love y'all.
Oh,
love
and
I'm
thank
gonna.
you.
you
Oh, sorry.
to Fat Rose
Yes.
Yeah.
and to Max and to
Yes.
the person who gave us our text
Yes.
information. Can you remember that person's name?
Oh,
Because I don't know how to use these machines, and Max and the team accommodated in a way that really I now have an
Kate.
Instagram. What's your
Wendy was
name?
an instrument.
Kate.
Kate, yes.
Katie. Kate. Thank you, Kate.
And Dawn.
Ooh, Dawn.
Yeah. Thank y'all so much. And for the folks who I don't know the language, viewers, who y'all, who the audience, I don't know the language, but thank y'all for um coming through. And I'm hoping that, it's conversations like that we are continuing.
Yeah, we'll see you on the black hand side.
We love y'all. Okay. I know who Quantum Me is. Yes. We love you too, Lo. Yes, Lo. And also it's a new Kwanzaa store that's going to be coming. So Kwanzaa Me, you have to follow them.
Oh, and please do. I am involved with I know that everybody here is a member of an organization. Um, y'all two are members of BYP 100. People
Black Youth
should
Project
join.
100. We're in the New Orleans chapter. Let's highlight the New Orleans chapter.
Yeah, and you're a part of other organizations as well. Any you want to shout out before we click off?
Oh, well, the Song chapter, like Song has a chapter here in New Orleans. And
Southerners
the
on New
meeting,
Ground.
Southerners on New Ground, and their meeting is on tonight. It could have ended.
Yeah, it's a time
Um,
conflict.
now I feel bad because I'm going to forget an organization, and they're going to be like, "Well, damn, Mandisa, you was on live and didn't even shout us out. I'm sorry."
What about the Birthmark Doula Collective
Birthmark Doula Collective,
and the center,
Breakout.
the breakout youth breakout? Uh, so these are organizations that we encourage you to connect with or deepen your connection with if you're already connected. So yeah, organize, organize, organize.
Okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye.